progress. You spoke about the role of the church as forming or promoting living, role of the church as living together and forming communities and meaning. It seems to me that this communities and meaning can be is done naturally. I don't think it needs to be promoted. For instance, human beings work together, they believe together, they form art societies, social science societies, and various other interests that form communities and form meaning. So my question is, what need is there for any church?
That's an excellent question, and as I've said, I'm not sure that the institutional church should be salvaged, accepting in the ways that it can support that movement. But I was one of the workshops I was at today was Environics polling research done on communities that they do. I think they do it semi-annually. And they were using it to say, okay, what's the demographic in your particular neighborhood and things like that. And one of the things that they measure are different social values and what the social value of the group around your particular church. You can look at that and decide, you know, whatever you're going to do with that information. But one of the things that disturbed me was in the neighborhood of the person who was leading it. One of the very high social understandings was social Darwinism, because humans can form communities and they can ascribe to particular trends. And social Darwinism is really a destructive trend right now, where we believe that society has nothing to offer individuals, that it's the survival of the fittest out there, that, you know, if I'm educated and I can get my good job, to hell with the next guy. And I think that's the kind of work that church can do. And absolutely there are other societies that do that. But we happen to have a corner on a huge number of outlets from which we could actually be doing that, probably more than anyone else. If we could actually get about doing that, instead of, you know, continuing to promote an understanding of the universe and a worldview that can actually counter that kind of work and be destructive around that kind of work. So if this work is happening in other communities, then I'm all for that, and I think that that should continue. But I think it's also important to have communities that are intentionally about addressing some of the negative values that we're presented with 24/7 in the contemporary society in which we live. He's still not happy with it.
I'm just wondering why, believing what you do and experiencing the inner conflict that you didn't migrate to the Unitarians.
Yes, several people have said, you know, why don't you become a Unitarian, or what's the difference between what you're doing and Unitarianism? And my response is generally that my hope is we'll stop asking what the difference is between one thing and another. That we'll start looking at what those common values are that we're trying to lift up, and that we focus on those instead of focusing on dividing ourselves by what we believe. That's what beliefs do. As soon as you articulate your beliefs as a community of faith, there are those who are with you and those who aren't. But if you articulate how you want to live together, then it's a lot easier to grab together a group of people that say, yes, I want to live that way too, help me figure it out. Or let's work together in bringing it about. So mostly, someone gave me an answer to this the other day, mostly it's loyalty. I really don't want the church that I'm in to die. And so I'm going to, I mean, some of them think I'm working deliberately to kill it, but I'm going to work to try to make it the best thing that it can be. And that's, you know, you do that with family. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your speech. I enjoyed it very much. I've got a Progressive United Church minister in front of me, so I'm going to talk about this issue.
Okay.
When I came back to Canada in 1985 after living outside the country for 8 years, I found out the United Church congregation I attended as a child had split over the issue of homosexual clergy being allowed by the United Church. About 1/3 of the congregation, including the minister, and had left to form another congregation, including my sister, several old friends of the family. And I didn't think of these people as, to me, that's a horrible reason to split up a congregation. I can never think of a worse reason to split up a congregation. And it amazed me. But when I talked to some of these people, they said we didn't leave because we were homophobic or because we hate homosexuals, or we split because the United Church treated us with contempt when we tried to doctor. That's why we left. Footnote to this: more recently, I've acquired a friend who happens to be a homosexual, who was a United Church elder. And he left the United Church because he thought, one of the reasons he left was because he thought the congregation he was in had reacted badly at that time as well. Just by getting from both sides. I'm just going to let you make
There's been an enormous amount of really bad behavior around those kinds of divisive issues in the church. And a lot of that bad behavior has been able to happen because the United Church has not dealt with the fundamental issue, which is the authoritative Word of God for all time, and the fact that the Bible is not that. And if we were able to say, okay, so that's written there, it's just somebody's opinion, and it was somebody's opinion, 2,000 years ago, and we don't live like that anymore. We don't, oppress women in that way, sort of. And we don't, if we weren't trying to, get everything back and line it up with first century morality, things would be a lot easier. But until we deal with that issue, those other issues are going to still come up. And that's what's happening in the Anglican Communion right now. And they are treating each other very badly. And that's an issue. If you're in a community that has as its guiding principles the way you want to live and the way you want to treat one another, particularly those who have different lifestyle choices, different beliefs, different opinions than you, and you have a document that says you will treat that person with respect and engage them, challenge them if you think that they are wrong, but do so with respect and expect to be answered with respect, then those kinds of things wouldn't happen. But we have instead these other creedal statements that we've made more important than how we want to live. The early Christian communities were called Christian in a derisive way because of the way they lived, because they lived in these radically ethical ways, or so we're told. It wasn't until we started getting into this creedal stuff that we started switching into Christianity being what you believed in. So getting back, I think, to some of the initial impetus of creating communities that were intentional about living with respect, and I'm not saying tolerance. Tolerance has its limits, and I think we need to be careful about that. But finding ways to engage one another with respect is extremely important. And had those lessons been learned, then your family and your friend would not have had those experiences. Thank you for that question.
Hello, thanks for the wonderful talk. I enjoyed it too. I have two questions. One short one, what is your concept of soul? I noticed that word was in that song. And the second question is, what is happening to your congregation now? You said at first they were all shocked and everything. What is happening now?
They weren't all shocked.
Oh.
Okay, there's some very cool stuff being done on soul by Simon Berkovich and Ken Van somebody or other. A near-death experience guy who's a cardiosurgeon in Holland, and where the soul is or what it is, it will be, I don't know where it is, I don't know what it is. I assume that when we find out, there will be some kind of natural explanation for it, and we keep looking for that. One of the first times I set eyes on Justin actually was with Michael Persinger's talk on trying to find the God presence in the brain. And I was really intrigued with that work. And the work that Simon Berkovich is doing with Pin von Limmel is about, the suggestion is that our DNA tracks us to some kind of electromagnetic field around us, which is where our feelings, our memories, our soul, if you will, resides. I don't know whether that's going to be proven to be true or not, but I find it fascinating to explore that kind of interesting stuff. But they're very convincing. You should check it out. So I don't know where soul is. I would probably interchange the word soul with the sense of spirit, with the sense of meaning. You know, what is it that compels me to live in a particular way? What is it that needs to be nourished from time to time, or I become completely brittle and dry and hard to live with? That kind of understanding. Now about the congregation, over the course of the 9 years or so that we've been doing this, those for whom an access to that spiritual nurture, that place where one can grow, if their only point of access was through the Word God, the stories from the Bible, an understanding of Jesus, if they need those as portals to get into that place, then they've gone, because they don't get those portals anymore. For many people, they've found other portals. You know, as those ones were closed, they found other ways to access that. When we talk, I often refer to it in connection with the gender-inclusive language debate, where we stopped using Father God and we started talking about loving God or compassionate God or something like that. We'll take God out of that, and we now talk about compassion, or we talk about love, or we talk about justice. And people who had an idea of God that called them to live in that way still see and experience that sense. They don't need the word. And so the community has been stable in its numbers and that kind of stuff over these years, which is a very good sign, because we've lost a lot of people, but they've been replaced by others who have not been able to find communities where they can ask questions, where they don't have to translate everything as metaphor, where they don't have to sing hymns where they, you know, that they don't believe in. So they've attached themselves to this community. So we have people that travel from fairly large distances to come and be with us. But we're a fairly small community, and you know, the experiment isn't over. The hope is we'll survive this, but I don't know.
Just one more short one. Where did they go, those that left?
Oh, they found oddly enough, there's a bunch of communities out there that still use the word God and Jesus. So they didn't have that hard a time finding a place to go. And we helped some of them find a place that would work. So,
thanks.
You're welcome, thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
I was wondering if in your studies of Christian history, if you found a historical precursor to your current philosophy.
Oh God, they're everywhere. The only difference is that they've been carved outside of the church. Because, like I've said to Justin, there's nothing in my book that is radically new. The only thing that's new about it is that I'm still in the church. You know, it's been out 3 months and I'm still here. That's the new thing. But the things that I'm saying have all been said before, and said clearly and said well. So like the quest for the historical Jesus, which is very current now, you know, that happened in the 18th century, in the 19th century. It's happening again. I mean, those waves sort of go through. I think that what happens is that as we get close to realizing the truth, we back off and we find something else to divert our attention, because we don't want to lose that worldview. It's a very scary thought.
And what happened to? Okay, so they just kind of disappeared, or like what happened to these movements?
Burned, and they got, you know, like different things happened. You know, Albert Schweitzer went to Africa.
Crusades against them?
Sorry?
You had crusades against
well,
them?
Yeah,
like
there were
against
crusades
Tatars?
against them. There are all kinds of ways that people in the church chose to reject the introduction of those kinds of conversations into that milieu.
So just out of curiosity, when was the last time this kind of popped up in history?
Oh, like a historical movement?
Yeah.
Well, like the work that I'm doing, it broke its way into the church, into ecclesial institutions, more dramatically after the Second World War, because of the challenge to the concepts of God that war presented to theologians. They couldn't live comfortably with an understanding that Christianity was the only way to salvation, and they couldn't live comfortably with a God that was being invoked on both sides of the battle lines, you know, because that just blew their minds. So they had to, at that point, start creating new concepts and new understandings. So starting in the early 50s, it hit theological colleges in the 1960s in a big way, and liberal mainline denominations I'm talking about, and has sort of kept moving from that. It bled into the pews sort of in the mid-'80s and has continued to be available to those in the pews in a way that it has never been before. And that is part of what's creating the need to do this in the church. Like, the church is going to hemorrhage entirely from the left if we don't really accommodate that rational application against our beliefs.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have two questions. First being, after all this stuff you said, I still don't really know if you're with or without God. And secondly, or if you want to answer that one first, I can.
Well, the reality is that when people in my profession, particularly in the United Church and other mainline denominations, apply their craft, we use the word God all the time. But we don't mean at all what most people mean when they say God. We've constructed this whole little definition thing that happens in our head that allows us to say that word. So if I was to pull out my definition, I could say, oh yeah, I believe in God because I believe in that definition. I don't believe in that theistic God of the Bible. I don't believe in, some supernatural daddy in the sky who's going to take care of us and going to fix all our problems. But I can come up with an understanding that most of my colleagues would say, oh yeah, that's right. And so that's the with God thing. The without God is leaving go of all that misinterpretation, which in my community means you can't use that word because people don't know. That's that whole thing. That's how they got to the point of that elementary understanding, because every time I said God, they thought I was talking about him, right? And I kept reinforcing that every time I used the word, so I had to stop using it. Unless I explained it every single time, and that just got bulky.
And my second question is more in line with, I guess, contemporary United Church politics. And for example, obviously when there's a debate or a meeting, a congregational, like a meeting of all United ministers in Toronto, you refrain from prayer and certain aspects of the meetings because of your beliefs, because you know that the other ministers don't subscribe to the same things that you do? Or do you guys find common ground that you can both work with?
I absolutely don't participate in those aspects of worship services that I can't ascribe to anymore. Which means that when I go to communal services that are a gathering of a larger group, I generally don't say very much of anything. I don't sing the hymns, and recently several members of our congregation went to a presbytery-wide service. That was to kind of get to know each other and see what we have in common. And after that service, one of the members of my congregation had to leave because she was so upset by what was being said. Most of them couldn't sing the hymns, they couldn't participate in prayer, they couldn't understand the sermon, they couldn't take communion, because they felt that the things that were being said were so outside the realm of their belief that they just couldn't, with integrity, participate. Now, if all of those people came to our church and participated in our worship service, they would walk out of there without having been offended by anything that we said. And that's the with or without God thing too. If you can come in and participate in that community, and there's nothing that we will say that will exclude you. It's a radically inclusive community, whether you're an atheist or a traditional theist. But when we go there, the language is particularly exclusive, and we can't participate.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi there. In listening to your talk and in the questions that you were just answering, you used the term theistic God, and you kind of criticized these. What is it? What would be an example of a non-theistic God? And maybe you answered that already, but I didn't quite track with that.
Well, that's the non-theistic God is the God that we've been carrying around with us. We who have been theologically trained, and that's when we talk.